You're not working.
Yeah, I'm working.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Thursday, February 27th, 2025 at 10:26 in the morning. We're back from a short break and continuing our conversations on career technical education with the Agency of Education, Secretary Saunders, and our friends at APA. So now I think we're going to switch over and talk about funding.
Yes. At this point, we'd like to transition to reviewing the financial analysis that was conducted as part of the study. So with that, I will allow Jen to orient you to what page number that starts on within the existing report. And it would be helpful, I think, Jen, if you could share your screen as well. Yeah. Or Justin.
Yeah, Secretary, I will share the screen if we can get permission to do that. And it starts on page 19 of the report. Okay. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, there was one of the recommendations that was made in the legislative report that APA did on CTE was to directly fund CTE and to look at identifying cost per pupil. And in that report, cost per pupil differentiated by program. And so I want to just mention here that in the report, we'll talk a lot about why we did not differentiate funding by different types of CTE program. And we can, but I don't, today I just want to get to where we got to the 25,000. And so you do see a single funding amount. There's a lot of work that was done to land on the fact that we believe that's the right way to do it. The big reasoning there is that the differences in types of programs being provided by center were not different enough that we thought having different funding by different types of program would be relevant. So just kind of with that request of how did we map to some of those original 10 recommendations, that's one of those things. And again, we'll write all that out and kind of lay out how each of those recommendations mapped. So what we did do is we went into the financial data system from the from the Agency of Education. We looked at the expenditures for 3 years. So for fiscal year 21, 22, and 23, for each of the 15 public centers. And we looked at the expenditures and there's got to be some accountant sitting around the table somewhere here. We're looking at program codes 31 and 32. Those are the program codes associated with career and technical education. So we're looking at the expenditures at the 15 centers for their career and technical education. And then we took those total expenditures and we divided it by the students in the centers in that year. And so we all know that current funding is actually based on a 6-semester average. But to really think about what's being spent per pupil in a year, we looked at the number of students across basically the 2 semesters within that fiscal year. And so that's just kind of the math of what we did. And then what is also true when you look at these expenditures and you start to look at it here is that there's clearly federal funding that is provided to the CT centers, and then there's the state funding. And so we looked at the per pupil amounts in both, but our recommendations are really only based on the expenditures excluding those federal funds. And so when you look at expenditures across the years, you will see that we had a median expenditure in FY21 of about $23,000 if you look at all sources. And that goes up to a little over $25,000 in FY23. When you back off the federal sources, those numbers go down to about 20,000 in FY21 and 23,303 in FY23. So we're a couple school years back, but those are the numbers that we were taking a look at. I think there's been questions and we understand why did we go with median versus mean or kind of a simple average. There's a lot of variation across the programs. Really, again, over 100% difference in per pupil costs. And so as we looked at that variation, we thought either it kind of exclude the outliers high and low, or to really focus on that median. We went with the median. I will say, and we can bring some of this back if requested, we've also looked at the average, and in some cases, the average is a little bit above the median. In some cases, the average is a little below the median, but the number is still very close to these kind of 23, this 23,000 in FY23, or the 21,822 in FY22, or the 20,041 in FY21. It doesn't dramatically shift if you use mean versus median. We just thought median was the best representation due to the kind of large variation that you see across the centers. Then the next thing we really wanted to take a look at is, is there a dramatic difference in the amount being spent in centers who are meeting different quality kind of metrics? And so the first thing that we looked at just simply is, if you're just looking at centers with full day programs versus part day programs, you'll see here that cost is pretty similar, or that median is similar. Then if you were to look at centers with academic support personnel, so some centers have those supports for students, some don't. Again, you're right in that median's right in that 23,000. If you look at the top performing post-secondary, the centers with the highest post-secondary credentials, again, median stays right there. If you look at instead of credentials, actual credits, so earning credits leaving the CTE center, you do get a higher median than you did before. If we're looking at those top performing based on the work-based learning metrics, we go back to about that 23,000. And if you look at the top performing with post-program placement, so continuing on, it goes up a little bit. But every number here was within a pretty tight range, right? You're in that kind of 23,000 to 24, 25,000. So what we weren't seeing is that it costs dramatically more to have higher performance than kind of what was going on at that median across all centers when looking at cost per FTE. So we stuck really focused on a number much more in that, kind of on that median across all centers.
Justin, can I pause you there for a second?
Yeah.
I know Tony has a question. I just have a question too. Is it possible that the cost is less about how much it costs to provide the services and more about how much people can afford to, how much districts can afford to pay for students, with the numbers being so similar across all of these different areas?
I would suggest that.
Did we think about that?
Yeah, and in part, it's why we're looking at the median. The variation actually in cost across centers is very large. And at an FTE level, it's from, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 per student to over $30,000 per student. So I do think some of what we see in what's being spent is absolutely true, is what communities are willing to pay within their budgeting process. So that was one of our big, really, I'd say concerns in trying to figure out what the cost is versus what is being spent. And so that's where we did feel more comfortable as we looked at the fact that at this kind of $23,000 to $25,000 number, you could see multiple centers who were able to get the performance level, and they were getting those higher performance, right? So absolutely, I think the hardest thing in your overall system, not just with CTE, is really understanding what needs to be there versus what was available because folks wanted to have something, right? That's because local communities can make that decision in a way that doesn't happen, truthfully, in most states.
And Tony, I know you had a question.
Yeah, I was just looking at centers with full day and part day programs, and there's almost no, the difference in cost is very minimal. Is there a reason for that? You'd think part day programs would be lower cost.
I think it's because of our decision to use FTE as our denominator. So those part day programs, you're using their half day count of a student. So each student's really only counted as a half in the denominator. And so, but I will say that the mean for part day programs is a little bit lower than the mean for full day programs. So there's a slight savings, I think, with the part day programs, but at that median, we were surprised too that the numbers were so close.
Justin, I also had a question and just in terms of supporting with the comparative analysis. If you would be prepared today or in the future to compare this spending to other states would be helpful.
I would not be prepared today. We can definitely take a look. And I know we did that a little bit. Apples to apples comparisons in part, and I think as someone mentioned here, there's a lot of very different approaches to CTE
Right.
across the states. So we will try to get the best apples,
Right.
but we'll work on that.
So your report, I think, identified in needs maintenance, and I'm wondering, and some facilities, I think, have gone ahead and tried to bond for that, and some haven't been able to. I'm wondering whether these figures include, debt components into the, the median and the median expenditures.
I want to confirm 100%, but as we did this work, we have what we've called recipe card in all of the kind of fiscal analysis we've done for this work, for all the work we've done with AOE and the listen to learn, turn and TOR and other things. And one of our goals was to remove debt service and those capital outlays. I want to confirm that, but our goal was to have that out when we did these kind of operational analyses.
It does create great variability if it's
Yeah.
not.
Good thinking.
And so just a brief reminder, switching over to the policy brief, kind of how do you take then that $25,000 per pupil? How does that get to the BOCES? It really still builds on the foundation formula. And I think it's really important to remember, and this goes back to the question about kind of what is versus what's needed. The foundation formula creates kind of a 180-degree switch in how you think about budgeting. It identifies an amount of dollars related to the needs of students, and that creates the available dollars, and then kind of budgeting happens within those available dollars. And so the CTE system through the BOCES is going to be receiving that $15,000 or the $25,000 per student, and then the BOCES will be working with the centers to develop each of the centers' budgets. The funding will come from starting with the sending district providing a on behalf payment of $8,000 out of the base funding they would receive for each of their students who are at the CTE center, and then an additional weight that would go directly to the BOCES also of $17,000 to get to the $25,000. What remains is this $5,200 per CTE student at the sending district. Again, fewer districts in our construct that we built this around, the 5 districts, but it is still really trying to work with one of our key recommendations coming out of those 10 recommendations that were mentioned, eliminating some of the tension between sending districts, really wanting to support kids going to CTE. Like we've heard that for 2 years. We want students to go take these opportunities, but when they do, the economies of scale issues we have at home, at our home sending high school, can mean less opportunity for the kids who stay. And so some of these dollars are for that, and then some of those dollars are for the other incurred costs of just support for students where you're still providing guidance, counseling, and some other sort of supports you're providing for those kids. So that's kind of the overall. So the reality is that the cost per CTE center student is closer overall in the system to $30,000, a little over, and you just want to be transparent with that. That is really the total cost of the CTE student throughout the system. Some of the things we mentioned on Tuesday, we believe that the weighting for economically disadvantaged could be used as part of the CTE, kind of the cost of CTE. So if a student is economically disadvantaged, those services have already we think, been captured in the way we look at the accounting to get to the $25,000. We think the sending district would still receive and need to help provide services with the BOCES, either English learner or special education services. So they would still generate those weights. And I'm going to stop sharing. If anyone wants me to go back to a page, I will. Makes it a lot easier to see you all if I can stop sharing real quick.
Can I just ask one question about that, Justin? Thanks for that diagram. Based on the remarks you made a little while ago or a few minutes ago around debt, do those numbers include that portion of operations of the CTE, or is that accounted for somewhere else?
They do not at this time, and I think Secretary Saunders, I think mentioned on Tuesday, it's one of the things we need to dig into and create a really lined out plan, both for this sector and just for district transformation as a whole.
Thank you. Tony?
Uh, going back to what I was talking about, I see the funding here, but I don't see a distinction between a part-time versus a full-time CTE. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the way that we envision it is that a part-time student counting as would be a half FTE in the current system. And so really you take all this and cut it in half. So they would be generating $12,500. 4,000 of that would be coming from the on behalf payment. And then my math would have to be good. 8,500 of that would be coming from the CTE. So that's why we stick with the FTE number in the funding system, because it helps to account for the full-time versus half-time students.
But the bottom line is that the sending school would get to keep more of that money.
Exactly.
It's only part-time. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Have there been an analysis done of pros and cons between full day and a half day, and something that we would look at when we put this new system together of are we going to go the route of saying everybody's going to be full-time or everybody's going to be half-time, or are we going to allow for regions to be able to structure their programs the way that
I think the question is the recommendation on program quality considerations with part-time and full-time. So Ruth, I'll allow you to respond.
I think about that a lot. I also think about how we have hybrids right now, right? So we have some of our half-day centers that provide some full-day programs because the time needed to do the learning means that by the time you get there set up and clean up, you've lost most of your instructional time. So I believe North Country Career Center has 2 or 3 programs right now, and I'm going to get the number wrong because it varies a little bit, but where they're full day, like their auto program and their natural resources program, because they have found that works best. We have others that are half day. I think one of the things I have thought about, we have all kinds of information due to our federal reporting requirements that really show program quality. And I think as part of a transformation, we really look at where our program quality is strong and where we design to address program quality. Because one of the things our current system doesn't allow for is how we also design for a student who may need extended time. And so I was in a meeting yesterday with one CTE center where for students in 2 of their programs, they're a half-day center, but they're providing some programs with a 3-year option for students who may need extra support and repetition to be able to earn the credentials that lead to the program quality. I think we have many models currently, and I look at the next transition period as a time to really capture our best practices and design to replicate those in what we move forward. And also to think through whether halftime and full-time are so much of it, we set halftime and full-time a really long time ago. And we haven't really rethought what's the right time.
I'm wondering if, there's a possibility of moving more students in halftime.
There's also the possibility, there's so many possibilities, right?
Yep.
And we have thanks to our federal requirements, we know by center, by program, where we're strong and where we have room to grow. We also know where we're strong in terms of additional academic supports for students, where we have opportunities to improve, and all of that should inform a really deliberate process in designing the right mix.
Justin, anything further related to the funding or the analysis that's been conducted to date?
Nope, that kind of covers it for us, but happy to take more questions.
And I think it would be helpful to bring back some additional detail around the program quality that Ruth has analyzed to inform that conversation. So I made note of that.
There are a number of recommendations made intended to improve quality.
Yes.
And, they're embedded, I think, the 10 recommendations that I saw before and what you've been presenting here. Have you been able to sort of identify okay, recommendation 8, there's this fiscal impact versus 5, whatever. Have you analyzed in that way? I think, in terms of trying to think, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so what we have right now is we did our best to map those initial recommendations from the legislative report and talk about each of them in the more full report that we released Tuesday. And so we talk about kind of how we embedded these, what we did and didn't, right? To the point of we had said we were going to have multiple weights and we don't. We have a single weight, right? So we talk about the why. We might have thought one thing in the legislative report and landed on a different final recommendation here. We do not have detailed out, I think, for each of those reports what the fiscal impact is. We can take a look where that makes sense and where it might not work, but we can absolutely dive into that.
Thank you.
And also here is part of that question, what are the high leverage recommendations? So there's cost and impact.
Yes.
Okay. So with that, if there are no further questions, we'd like to transition to talking about the support that would happen as part of the transformation. We've described that this would be a 2-year timeline. We have identified that we see variability across tech centers, and the intent of the proposal is to ensure consistency of quality. So questions we received a couple days ago would be, well, what would that look like? And how would the Agency of Education be actively engaged on the ground to support that transition? Certainly want to signal from my perspective, I feel strongly that we need to be supporting this on the ground throughout the entire transformation. And I'll allow Ruth to kind of talk through how we're thinking about that approach and differentiating our support both for centers and also by program based on what we're seeing in terms of quality and cost differences.
I will say that the good news is that since we have been operating under Perkins 5, which is the most recent version of the federal legislation that provides our federal funding for career technical education, we've really been focusing on strengthening program quality and strengthening student outcomes. And so we have systems in place to continue that work, and we can tweak those when we know exactly where we're moving forward to best design our efforts in those areas over the next 2 years to fully support transformation. We'll say from that work, meeting with teachers, we have teachers who are concerned, but we have teachers who are excited, and I think that provides strength in bringing those people together to work toward that shared goal. And I do think our data clearly shows us where we have program enrollment that's strong, program enrollment that's weak, program quality that is strong, program quality that is improving but still has room to go, and only a handful of cases where program quality is of concern. And we also have the question of where we currently see academic supports and where we don't, and where we see significant academic need and where we see less academic need. And how do we learn from all of that to influence what transformation looks like? So I'd say we have better data than we've ever had before, and we use it more robustly than we've ever used it before. So that will help in a transformation process. I think many of the things that come into transformation that are on the minds of the directors that you will hear from are making sure that they can explain this in ways to all of their stakeholders and understand the impact. And I also would say that they're also concerned about all those details about collective bargaining agreements. We have 17 different centers with different models. We have some areas that have specific provisions that really support their CTE center staff and others that really don't support their CTE center staff. Everybody comes with their own pieces to work through. And I think we'll have to be very deliberate in making sure we understand fully what needs to be addressed and designed for that. I'm encouraged by the fact that I think we have many of our CTE directors who will be excellent partners in working through that. And they've already started to bring those pieces to the table. And I think as I think about it, I'm thinking about two that really are focused on how do we best identify the supports we need for students with disabilities, and how do we better define what stays with the sending district and what the CTE center should provide, and what does that really look like in practice. Whereas I think we have others who are really focused on how do we make sure we're really recruiting and supporting teachers and doing all of the things that the APA report calls for. I don't know what this will look like in practice, but I do think we have areas where we have really strong center-based leadership that will help us as we finalize this plan for transformation, and they will let us know where they need the most support. I would also say we have a good idea of which centers need more support than others and which program areas need more support than others. So we can design deliberately to that when we're all clear on exactly what our next steps are.
And I think there were also some questions just around cost, right? So as we talked about the same program costing a very different amount by center, can you kind of talk through how we help to support that and kind of getting some more alignment and standardization?
Where I look at that, and I think Justin and Jen will help me look at this in ways too but what I see currently is some of our programs that cost less because one, we're underpaying teachers who then we have teachers in some regions of our state. So the program looks like it costs less. It's the same content, but if we look at the comparison of the teacher pay for the program in a program that has a higher cost and the teacher pay in a program that has a lower cost, there's a big range there. And what we've also seen over time is that centers that pay less invest in training the person, helping them become licensed as a teacher, getting them to be really good, and then they're stolen away by a center that can pay more that's within commuting distance. So leveling some of that out. I also think there are definite differences in how that shows up in budgets in terms of which centers provide what professional development costs and what support and teacher licensure costs. And there are significant costs in how centers support those dual enrollment credits and those post-secondary credentials, and whether those come out as program costs, I'm learning that some centers are asking parents to share a part of that cost and are only providing financial assistance for students who request it. How do we remove those variables from the mix? And then I would say, in addition, we have some centers where programs are well-resourced and well-equipped and others where they're not. And some centers where there's money built into their budget to regularly upgrade certain things and others where they're always scrambling, but that would impact program cost us also, and it would show up in the data that Justin had to work with.
So part of this planning would also develop an inventory as we think about by center, by program, the needs for each content area. And so that would look at enrollment, cost, and program quality. And I think as Ruth has expanded, it's important within the cost piece to itemize how that's being invested. And so that would be part of the next phase planning.
I also think the piece that comes into play too is we have current staffing that would come out and how programs are supported that don't reflect the student data we see, but reflect other factors. So for example, I may be comparing two CTE centers that have similar enrollment and a similar percentage of students with disabilities. One center may have one special educator because, back to the point earlier, that's what they have been able to support in their community with the resources available. And we may have another center that provides three special educators to support students, or one academic teacher versus 2 or 3 academic teachers who are providing. So some centers may only have a math integrationist or only have a literacy integrationist. Some have both. They're not based on data. They're based on budgeting factors at this point in time that come outside of that. How does that impact program costs as it's distributed in all the numbers Justin's looked at?
I think this gets to the important point of how do we achieve that balance of having the right customization for each center while still ensuring consistent quality. So as we've built this funding model, it does come with flexibility to be able to differentiate and meet needs. But to Ruth's point, there's opportunity for us to really quantify and clarify the quality indicators that we'd want to see for consistency.
Right now, own physical plant and own physical plant in this transformation.
So as part of the proposal that was introduced by Representative Toof earlier this week, there's an outline of kind of ownership and how that transitions. We haven't learned in the past, and we've done some similar work, and so have that point of reference, but that is all detailed within the legislative language that was provided for the entire transformation proposal.
That includes all the CTE centers.
It does, as we're contemplating the districts and the regions. Mm-hmm.
Who owns the physical plant now? Is it the CTE district? Is it?
I would have to check. I'm not sure with the different governance structures if it's different
Oh,
ownership.
it's complicated.
So I think we'd have to.
It's complicated.
I would want to.
There's not a one answer.
So I'll put that on our list to clarify. I don't want to give you the wrong answer, so let us look at that. So ownership currently of the tech centers. Okay,
It's not just physical building, but the contents, all the equipment.
Absolutely.
All that stuff is expensive stuff and,
Mhm.
and then, and I guess for our edification, I think we'd like to know, who will own the property?
Right.
Going forward, will it be, does it proceeds if we go that route? Or would it stay within each district? Those are, I think, things we need to contemplate.
I'll go back to our language, but I believe it's the district in the future state, but let me confirm that.
But it can
The-
have to complicate it even more. When you talk about the district, is it
One of the five.
one of the five? So are we creating another issue there with the district owning the building and not the CTE system? Because we're creating two different systems and now, and so that might be a good thing because then it turns out to be a lease agreement instead of.
Okay.
So, I guess.
I think we're gonna have to take that away and come back to dig deeper into that complexity related to tech centers.
I will say where we don't have as much complexity is what's physically located within the facilities, because we've had clear requirements in place for a very long time that all of the things that are based in a CTE center are that regional CTE centers inventory and cannot be moved without a whole process. So like literally it was CTE funds, either state, federal, or tuition dollars that purchased them, and they are clearly the property of a regional CTE center. That may be based in different governance structures, but that part I think is a little clearer.
Yeah.
And more consistent regardless of the governance model that currently exists.
So I appreciate that we're looking at some kind of a lead time here. Practically, it might be, it takes 18 to 24 months to really map out what has to change and what the map is to getting things into the new system, and then another, 2 to 3 years to move into that system. I just want to flag that as 2 years from passing the law to putting ourselves into this new system might not be the right time. Even just thinking about collective bargaining, right? Some of those are 2 or 3 year contracts. So it would take time to even understand, right? If we're going to move people out of whatever collective bargain, and can we move people out of a collective bargain, right? Like I don't know the law around that. That's not anywhere near close to something that I have experience with. So I think that in some of this, I feel like we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, or we don't even know exactly what the system is that we're transforming to, and we're setting ourselves on a 2-year timeline to transform ourselves into this new system. And so I just want to flag that as let's be incredibly thoughtful about, we're going to develop this great system. We don't want to mess it up by giving ourselves not enough of a runway to get there.
I think as we do this work, we recognize that this is an accelerated timeline. There is a sense of urgency for us to move in this direction. We're working really diligently to flag where those areas are that need to be defined clearly. We've made note from this, and we'll continue to just work towards that and move as expeditiously as possible, because there is an urgency to get there. And there's also an urgency to do it right. And we're balancing that.
A little bit of tension there.
Possible. So that's what we had prepared for you today. Do you have any further questions for us? I know I've noted several areas where we're going to be following up.
Questions, committee? Great.
So just one comment and a question, I guess, at the same time. I appreciate your table, number 8 and 9. Statutory changes necessary as well as rule
I
changes.
thought that was helpful too. Yep.
At some point, that'll be helpful, I think,
Mhm.
in terms of our being able to understand what's being proposed.
Mhm. Yes.
Madam Secretary, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a good conversation. We certainly appreciate it. Looking more than forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you for the thought partnership. I thought today was really productive and appreciated the discussion. Thank you. Turn it over to our colleagues. Okay.
Commissioner? Okay, like to join us?
Give me space. Right.
Good morning.
So, good morning, everybody. My name's Kendall Smith. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Vermont Department of Labor, and I'm joined today by
Jay Ramsey. I'm the Director of Workforce Development at the Department of Labor. And as a reminder, I used to work for the Agency of Education for about 10 years. And I served as the State Director for Technical Education for 4 or 5 of those years.
So the great thing about Jay and I is we are kind of a blend of the workforce and education space, which will form our comments over the next hour or so with you all today. Formerly in the governor's office, I was the policy director, so I had my hand in a lot of pots, but 2 of those pots in particular were the kind of cradle to career through career spectrum, and worked closely with the Agency of Education and the Department of Labor, doing a lot of what Sabina will now be doing in terms of trying to be the connector and convener and keeping an eye on all the moving parts and pieces of our current system. So I'll start by giving just a couple overarching comments, and then Jay, I think with his technical expertise, is really going to give you the good meat and potatoes of our observations. And then I will we'll work off of each other, chime in as necessary. So we at the Department of Labor interact with CTE in a number of ways, but before we get into that, I really want to highlight the linchpin that CTE and that pivot point plays between education and workforce in terms of what comes next. I often view CTE as a demographic lifeline to many of our communities as we are trying to redo community revitalization, get more young people, as well as adults, which Jay will talk about, to live and work in Vermont, and being a really important piece of our workforce system as a whole, which we'll go into more details on. When Jay and I, and actually Secretary Saunders and a few folks, were visiting Riverbend Technical Center back in December, the tech center director over there is Riverbend. Anyone here's district? Bradford, actually, Monique, your director, was talking about how CTE students are more likely to stay and work in their communities after graduation and be engaged citizens. And so thinking about that, again, as we're trying to rebuild our workforce and retain young people here, seeing that role that CTE centers are playing in terms of helping keep young people at home and finding good jobs with our great Vermont businesses. As you all know, we have a workforce crisis in nearly every sector. There's currently about 2 job openings to 1 job seeker in Vermont. I had tried to write down a couple other tidbits here, but I think that is the important one. And when we look at how many youth participate in CTE programming, and I'll look at actually Zoe and Ruth doing fact checking because Ruth provided me some of these numbers yesterday. In 2024 state year, there were 1,728 CTE concentrator graduates. So people that were either part-time or full-time in CTE centers. Yep.
It's been a significant time.
Yep.
A full year of their
Yes.
half-day center.
And that's approximately 20 to 25% on an annual basis of our high school graduates, of hovering around 5,000 a year. And then if we further extrapolate that data in terms of, then I asked Ruth, well, where are they going next? So after they graduate, what's happening? Are they going on to higher education? Are they going directly into the workforce? Are they going into the military? Do we not know? Some people are hard to track. We were able to extrapolate from the placement data from 2024 that 52% of those students went on to employment, 44% went on to post-secondary education, 2% into the military, and 2% not placed or were not exactly sure what their next step was. So again, if we divide about 1,700 in half, we'll say that's about 700 youth going directly into employment post-graduation in 2024.
Drilling down a little bit more,
Mhm.
do we know how many of those students that have graduated are actually, they're in the workforce, but are they in apprenticeship programs where they're continuing their education, electrical,
We
plumbing?
do.
all that? Okay.
We do in fact. So again, because Ruth provided this data in our lovely partnership here, what of those CTE concentrators, 65% who graduated had earned post-secondary or industry credentials, 46% earned college credits, and 46 participated in a qualifying work-based learning experience. And I believe some of that is youth apprenticeship, but I'll look at my two experts here to correct
Also
me.
just add that we don't have the data accurately for the school year that ended in June 2024, but we do have it for the 2 school years before that, and it's been consistent that about 7% of our students are registered apprenticeship after they graduate. Or I would say we might also include it's registered apprenticeship or it's in a certification program that they're working full time and their employer is also paying for their students.
So,
That we know of.
So given some of that overarching context, kind of the 4 things we thought we would hit on, and then I'll pass it over to Jay, is how does VDOL currently interact with CTE centers and adult education and learning? What we find exciting about the proposal that AOE just walked through, again, from a workforce perspective, how this fits into the larger workforce system, and then kind of our vision of where do we go from here. So that's my table setting, and Jay, why don't I turn it over to you to go more in depth.
Okay, so I'll just a current state of how the Department of Labor, and I'm gonna big umbrella Department of Labor, and then I'll winnow it down to workforce development's involvement. They're all going to be mixed in together. So the Department of Labor's involvement with the tech centers over the years has been from VOSHA and Project WorkSafe coming in to look at program space as part of the program evaluation that the agency has been required to do. As Ruth mentioned, Matt Barowitz and our Labor Market Information Division makes information available to the tech centers from that Promising Pathways brochure all the way down to the regional labor market analysis. That's a report that's on our website, and the Labor Market Information Division also responds to inquiries from the regional technical centers when they're doing their local needs assessment. And so that's another layer that we're involved in. From my regional manager's perspective and staff in the regional offices, some of the regional managers and some of the staff sit on the regional advisory boards. We want to be involved in informing what the tech centers are doing. We want them to know what the labor market is like. We want to make sure there's alignment with programs, and we want to make sure the tech centers know about the individual program opportunities that we have through federal and state funds. Some of our, I have one regional manager that is the chair of a regional advisory board. Staff sit on the regional advisory boards. And just for clarity here, the Department of Labor is already organized in 5 regions. So we have a Northwest, Northeast, Central, Southeast, Southwest. So the challenge there is being able to sit and be present on every regional advisory board. We are also involved in various ways with the adult CTE part of the tech centers. So that's the training programs that are made available to adults. Employers might pay for someone to sit in a course. An individual might pay for themselves to be in a course, but we consider those credential training. We also provide grants to the adult CTE programs, and I don't want you to have an idea that that's a big, huge amount because it's not. we have about 360,000 to 400,000 set aside in our base budget that goes to adult CTE. So it's little bitty pieces of the pie. Every center gets $20,000. And so I can talk more about that if you want. I'm going through my list of ways that we're involved with the tech centers from the secondary perspective and the adult perspective. We're working in the registered apprenticeship program to align the opportunities that employers have with the apprenticeship jobs and those programs with the programs in the tech center. So the main example there is electrical and plumbing. And then we put on career fairs, job fairs, and we're entering the space of apprenticeship fairs that are closed to the public, that are more intended for high school students. Part of that job is helping high school students and parents understand what is an apprenticeship, how do you get an apprenticeship, and how does that compare to a college pathway. So last year, we did a fair in Brattleboro. This year, we're doing a fair in Brattleboro and St. Albans, and I think there's 3 coming up in the spring. And then
Just I know pretty big uptick in people getting into the plumbing and the electrical fields just over the past few years. And I'm wondering if some of that has to do with more marketing, better marketing, getting kids to know what's out there and what can help them.
I would say yes to that, and also the changing expectations that young people have and that their families have about whatever the post-secondary options are. I think I don't want to provide misinformation, but it's about what are my opportunities, and I don't have to go to college. I can go this pathway.
That's providing them, that's getting that information and I think changing the narrative of everything's open to you, and your pathway to college, that's open to you, but a pathway into the trades or certifications is also open, and they're all equally important.
Yes.
And I think, and just to put a plug in for the committee, what we're talking about here has a lot to do with My Future VT, Advanced Vermont, as being a partner there. That's why it's important for us to continue to work with Tom and Advanced Vermont.
Tom did a nice op-ed recently. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but if you have a chance, it's in Vermont Business Magazine.
The final thing that I'll just illuminate for you all is about the work that the staff in the regional offices do with technical centers, and the programs that we administer are really based on the individual and their eligibility. So the work that staff do connecting youth is serving in-school youth. And also we're primarily interested because the majority of the federal funds for youth programs is focused on out-of-school youth. Out-of-school youth is not necessarily someone who's disengaged from school or who's not attending school. It could be someone who lacks the necessary skills to be able to graduate. And it's a broad definition, but you could think of them as opportunity youth. And we're not the only workforce partner that works with opportunity youth. The Higher Ability is a partner in the workforce system, and the adult education and literacy programs are part of the workforce system. We're all working with the federal funds we receive to support eligible youth and adults. So that's a little bit, not a comprehensive list, but the major things that we work on. And if I could just tie back to what Secretary Saunders and Ruth were talking about here, our interests are about alignment. We want to see policy alignment and funding alignment, programmatic alignment, we want to see reduced complexity. It's hard for us to have 5 regions and work with 17 different administrators.
Jane, could I just make a plug on that point? So while Jay just went through a really nice list of the ways we're interacting directly with the education system, Jay is also regularly interacting with another of other workforce and training partners that are then also interacting with the school system. When you think about like Vermont Works for Women, Resource, Audubon, there's a whole host, right, of other workforce training providers that are providing important experiences and skills to youth operating in the state. And Sabina's working on also, again, corralling all of those and figuring out how we do more of that alignment work. And so in terms of reducing the complexity and simplicity for us, some of the initial feedback when we've been talking with some of those workforce partners is they would also like to see some of that simplified ways of interacting with schools. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Of interacting with schools as well. Where, for example, right now, one of those organizations is trying to get their programming recognized under flexible pathways for credit-bearing experiences. And when they go to do that work, they have to approach each school individually, which is a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of effort if they have a statewide reach. And so if you were able to go to these larger governance models or a single governance model, it could help simplify, like for us, some of that interaction and work between other additional workforce partners that we are working with and are also serving some of those same youth.
And just building off of what Kendall has here, the Department of Labor and the Workforce Development Program, we're interested in getting people jobs. The thing that gets people jobs is training and working with employers. And so a statistic that I think is probably necessary for this discussion is what's the size of employers in Vermont? So I pulled some data from the labor market information site, did some quick math. 83% of employers in Vermont have 9 or fewer employees. And so just think about what that means for a second. If you're an employer, you've got 6 employees, you want to be focused on your business, the thing that you know, that thing that you're trying to make, the thing that you're trying to do, and you've got 2 tech centers trying to contact you, plus the Department of Labor, plus HireAbility, plus any of these other partners that are around, that is a layer of complexity for a small business that we can fix. And I think the changes that are being proposed help to address some of that complexity and improve the experience for Vermont's, I will call them micro businesses. That's really at the heart of, I think, our interest in this. Reduce the complexity, improve the experience, make it easier for an employer to find talent. And from our perspective, again, that bridge from employment, from a person to employment is training. Let's have systems in place that can make it easier for the training system to serve employers so that I don't have to have 9 different conversations with each of you, and you don't have to have 9 different versions of a training program, that we can lift it up and say, here's the consistency across the state, given our geography and given that we have such a plethora of small micro businesses.
So why don't we, I guess, maybe just pause for a second, because I know Jay and I just did a lot in kind of a rapid fashion here. So did anyone have any questions about the way VDOL at least currently interacts with CT centers that you'd like us to loop back on, or something you thought we did that you didn't hear and you'd like to confirm?
Just have a question.
Mhm.
Is what we're currently doing for adult tech ed working?
Great question.
Could I ask it broader?
Well, yeah, yeah. Do you want to ask it broader?
No.
Or okay. No, I'm like, okay, we're gonna go another layer of the onion out. No, that's actually a really good question. Something that Jay, that we came prepared to discuss is, because again, a lot of the work we do as well as with the adult education and training providers and system. that has an access to adult CTE, and what we think could be a potentially future conversation. I just worry about kind of capacity, generally speaking, for only so much transformation at once. But Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about your trip to Austria and some vision?
Yes. I do want to answer your question. So I think as you are hearing from the agency, there is variability around the state and a lot of perspectives around secondary CTE. I would say the same thing is true of adult CTE, that depending on where you live, depends, like
The experience you're gonna
your
receive.
experience is dependent on where you live.
And my question comes from, is $20,000 per tech center enough to provide any benefit
No.
to adults? Like that's, I mean, you know.
No.
It's gonna be a more.
Just to be pointed about it. And that is so this is something that we will need to dig into. And I think what Kendall is signaling is what I'm about to talk about here could be a phase 2. We don't need to try to solve all of the problems all at once. The adult CTE system has not been funded well or consistently for a very long time. So when I was in a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that I had gone on a trip with Commissioner Harrington and Secretary Curley and Tim Tierney from the Agency of Commerce. And we took a trip to Austria. We have a partnership with Austria. They've been here multiple times. We went there to investigate their apprenticeship model. We're not the first to have done this. What I learned from people who have gone to Austria before from Vermont and trying to figure out their apprenticeship system is that there's nothing that we can apply here in Vermont. And I say that's not true. They are ahead of us by a couple of hundred years, but there are things that we can learn from their system that we can take and apply here. And the main takeaway that I had from that visit is they have systems in place that are well-funded, that support the individual at multiple levels through technical training, accessed through vocational schools in their model, accessed through training centers that the chambers of commerce run, because all businesses are, I'm not saying we should do this, but all businesses are required to be members of the Chamber of Commerce and to pay dues. And what that gets them is access to technical training. And you have to choose a path in middle school, not saying we need to do that, but this is their model. You go to the technical training apprenticeship route, or you can go to the university route. All of them are paid for. They have mechanisms to go back and forth.
And they're held in equal regard,
Yes.
correct? Like that's an
Yes.
important thing that we've been trying, and Governor Scott's been really focused on, is to overcome that, air quote stigma around going to a CTE center versus your traditional high school experience. And again, it sounds like in Austria, both of those are held in equal regard, are valid options that you are encouraged to choose from.
Yeah,
That's where the-
Germany's system is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
We had, I can't remember how many years ago, but Senator Sanders was able to bring the German ambassador to the United States here.
Mhm.
We had a hearing with him and we talked this exact had the same discussion. It was probably at least 10 years ago. And I think that set this committee on a path of continuing to push for CTE and raising the bar so that college and CTE are equal.
So I'm going to say something from different perspectives. So as an employer, let's just say in Vermont, and I want to do registered apprenticeship, I don't have a ton of options for technical training. I either have to do it in-house, or I have to find a virtual provider that doesn't work for everybody, or I have to work with CCV or Vermont State University or some other organization to try to figure out coursework that's going to work for what I'm needing to do in my program. Adult CTE can play that role at the local level. As a taxpayer, a property taxpayer, I live in Barrie. As a taxpayer, and if I want to grow my skills and develop my professional path, I need training to be able to do that. I need access to something at the local level that's low cost, and that I also, I think generally people would feel like because I'm paying taxes, I should be able to access the school buildings and the assets that the technical system has been purchasing and using. We do not have a system that views it that way, I think. And not to mention, I'm a homeowner. I would like to go take a homeowner 101 course and learn a little bit about electrical and learn a little bit about plumbing. Maybe I want to take a baking class. Maybe I want to learn how to cook something. There's avocational things that we can tap into taxpayers. And then the tech centers start to become a community and regional asset that people can go to. And then it starts to become a part of our state recruitment strategy. Other states have this system, we don't. So when people move here, they go like, what's going on here? This can be solved. We can fix this and we can help recruit people, encourage them to live in our communities, encourage them to be part of the schools, give them a benefit to their taxes. And so not that there aren't other benefits to paying taxes, but I'm speaking to a very narrow thing right now. I also, so it's sort of in the spirit of that visit to Austria, trying to match up their system with ours, that we're working on a proposal that would marry up with the agency's proposal that's really focused on adult education and professional education. And when I'm saying adult education, I'm talking about adults who don't have a high school diploma. I'm talking about adults who want to access training at the local level and do hands-on, not virtual, and that professional training that's going to help somebody advance along a career path. Another part of this, in Austria, nearly all professions, well, let's say, nearly all occupations and industries have a professional approach. You want to be a waiter? That takes 3 years to learn. It's an apprenticeship program. There's a professionalization across all of their industries. And what comes with professionalization? You have to have structured pathways, you have to have training, you have to have work experiences. As you're gaining in skill, you're earning higher wages. I know that that's an important part of the discussion in the State House. So we can address the professionalization across industries. We can address the lack of training in hospitality and tourism. We can address wage increases if we can focus on enhancing the programs delivered through the tech centers that are serving adults. There's some other compelling statement that I've told you.
I think everything you say is compelling, but I don't know, again, within this kind of unified career, technical, adult and professional education system, I want to just underscore, this is not actionable right now.
Yes.
This is not ready. This is something we really do believe in what the agency has pulled together for the pre-K-12 system is the foundational building block, and that this would come after. And what we've been talking with our agency partners about in a really great back and forth is just making sure whatever we end up doing for CTE this year in the grades 11 and 12 and the early exposure pieces doesn't shut us off from being able to build off of this for what the next bookend looks like for adult education. And it's conducive to be able to keep this conversation going with you all and doing any sort of similar transformation that might be necessary to move from cradle to career, and I will credit Jay with this, to cradle through career. And really, how are we addressing you along the course of your life in terms of your career and your professional development through our education system?
And maybe one other remark that I would make about the system, as the demographics of the state continue to change, as we continue to have people relocate here, including refugees and immigrants, there's a group of people that have language access needs, and streamlining the system and more closely organizing it under the broader change, I think will improve the services offered through the technical education system for adults by being clearer about what the requirements are, creating expectations that they serve people in their home language as they're learning skills to adapt to the culture in the United States, and to learn English so that they can participate in the workforce. That was one point that I wanted to make, and I think the last point that I want to make here is 2 points, sorry. The question about the regional advisory boards, the question about program advisory committees, I think can also be addressed in this proposal if we could think about that vision. When we were working in the SOCWED and we heard proposals that involved a governor's skill cabinet, I think if we can have a sector strategies, and we could have a governor's skill cabinet in manufacturing and a governor's skill cabinet in hospitality and tourism, I'm just throwing some things out there, that would be the place where business and industry can get involved and can advise the entire system, not just individually the Department of Labor, the apprenticeship program, the state colleges, the CTE system, so on and so on. So that adds another layer, but it, I think, makes things more efficient and can improve the experience, again, of those small businesses who we're asking in multiple different ways how to help. And the final thing that I've heard over the years from the adult CTE coordinators is that they really would like to be able to access federal funding through student loans. There's lots of reasons why they can't do that. But if we were able to organize the system, fund it well, that might make them eligible for accreditation, and that they might be able to then help students apply for student loans to participate in technical training. And we might also have a way to leverage the Vermont 529 funds so that people who are making those investments could also use and access their tech center for adult training. Speechless.
It's something we've talked about for years and years.
I love the aspirational aspect of it. I think that it's the right time to start talking about it. Like, same thing, exactly what you said. We can't build a program without understanding the aspirations of the program. Like so it's great.
So we want to be a partner to you. We are a partner to the agency. I'm not sure, again, we'll open up for questions, but I just would go back to say we're very excited too about the vision that the agency's laid out for CTE, and we think that is the right step to take at this time to start having a better system that is connecting our CTEs and other programs with students, with the communities, with their partners.
I think to your point is that as we create this new system, that we have to have in the back of our minds these aspirations for our adult side of it as well, so that we're not creating something that pushes them out. But I think we've always talked about how do we integrate our from graduation to our adult side on CTE, so that it's a seamless process for someone to continue their education after graduation from high school.
Exactly. So we see again, phase 1 this year, this again, pre-K-12, it's not a big lift, right, change. And then this piece is almost like the phase two. If you guys want to start blocking off time for next year, I'm happy to be here every day.
I'm glad
getting
to
this
do
piece
that.
done with you. On the adult side.
Just, I mean, maybe this doesn't need to be said, but I think that we are right now have a unique opportunity because we are taking the system that has failed us and we're trying to design it from the ground up. We have AOE here, we have DOL here, and to keep these things, that it's beautiful, what you guys are talking about. And I would just ask AOE to keep that in the back of their mind as they design and bake this new system in, to keep that stuff in mind. That's all I have to say.
The other partners that aren't in the room, but that we are coordinating closely with, of course, our Agency of Commerce and Hireability under AHS as other core workforce providers and partners in the state.
And I think, should remember state government as well. We need to train our own people as well, and the tech centers can be part of that system as well for state government. Other question?
You want to show them your reports?
I just want to share how excited I am that we're at this table with the agency right now talking about this. This is the closest we've really ever been. And I'm waggling this at you because these are all words that I have written over the last
These reports on
15 years about what we need to do to change the system. And like, we're actively having the nuts and bolts conversation. So I appreciate it. I encourage you to continue to dig in.
Yeah. For our agency partners, the other, speaking of reports, I'll plug, if you haven't actually read the Listen and Learn tour report, there was a lot of community comment about the desire from parents and community partners to see change right around work-based learning, connections into businesses, pathways. So that was really, again, something we kept in mind and looked at as well.
Is there more to come on this subject from APA as well? Are they working on the adult side of the equation, or?
That hasn't been part of the scope of work, but we are fully committed to aligning our proposal to this vision, and we're actively collaborating.
And Zoe, the CTE's policy sprint team, it was just Courtney
Yes.
and Lisa and I had a conversation yesterday. There will be a meeting there'll be a meeting in March just about adult CTE, just to start to better frame how we build in the next thoughts about that. But to get that, while we still have that committee convened, to get all of their thoughts on paper to inform the next process.
Emily?
Yeah, thank you. This has been really great and very encouraging. I appreciate all the work that you've all done to think about and like start to really vision what our education could look like. My one question though is, do we have kind of a definitive delineation between CTE and college? Because especially as I look at like many of our college programs, they dovetail, especially with like they dovetail with technical education quite a bit, especially in the STEM fields. So have we kind of like set out and delineated what feels like college, what feels like CTE?
I think it's an important question, because I think if you asked each person in this room, you might get a different answer in terms of what does traditional college versus what does technical training look and feel like to them. So I'm not sure. Again, I would kind of look at maybe Zoe or Ruth or Jay who's swimming this a little bit more, but
It's actually, we want to have a lot of different on-ramps and off-ramps, right? Because you think about this through someone's career, but Jay.
You first and then me.
Okay, I appreciate the question so much. I sort of anticipated it and
15 years ago.
A few weeks ago as I was dumping this stuff out of my brain, but I think the way that we can understand college versus technical education, CTE, that CTE, and maybe if I could focus it on adult CTE, is about training, and college is about education. And so that means it's focused on broad intellectual development. Maybe it's focused on general and theoretical knowledge. It's typically longer term, multiple years. And it prepares people for a range of opportunities. And that training is really about acquiring a specific skill set. And it can be viewed as narrow and practical and task-oriented skills. It's often short-term, targeting immediate needs, and it's preparing people for specific roles or tasks. And so I think if you could think about adult CTE as a short-term thing that can become a launch pad for a longer-term thing, that there's a back and forth that can happen. I could have a degree, but I could also participate in the short-term training through CTE. I don't know if that helps or hurts.
Does that ring true to you?
Two thoughts. I have one, I think is currently defined in statute. Adult CTE is supposed to be those credential and training opportunities that are not part of a degree program, and that's been delineated that colleges provide degree programs. That's become more blurry since the statute was written because CTE, for example, provides many certificate programs as well as degree programs. But in addition, I think the piece that goes to that is it goes back to in our adult CTE system currently, we have models. One, I think the advantage to adult CTE is can be very flexible and nimble when it works well, and it can respond to those immediate training needs. And it can be shorter term training, and it can be very skills focused. But what we don't have that other states have, and I think this was a focus of the Thomas Miller and Associates report of a couple of years ago, was that other states have more integrated systems, so those pathways and the scaffolding is clearer. So if you earn a certain credential or certification in an adult CTE program, it may then have application to a degree program at the post-secondary level, and that's where Vermont hasn't yet done that work, and I think we're at a different point in time there as well, right? And we have some adult CTE programs, as I understand it, and I believe Stafford, again, is my example that comes to mind. But I believe they have at least one of their adult CTE programs that partners with Vermont State University and that is college credit aligned. And you probably have other centers that do that as well. So there are other regions of the state where those partnerships aren't in place. So we, again, how do we reach Jay's vision so that we have a really integrated system and it looks the same regardless of where you live?
I think, I've seen the shift from our state college system, from CCD and from the state universities, just going from purely academic to certification programs and starting to weave these in. And I think you're right, we need a statewide system working with our state college system and all our colleges to do that so that they are accepting some of these certifications as part of the learning process. And it really is helping bring more people to their campus, which they need.
Back in, again, I think it was 2019, there was a relatively smaller amount of money dedicated to the state college system to try to create a plan to deliver some of what was then VTC courses on CTE campuses to help with that rural access piece and equitably distribute these opportunities around the state. But then COVID happened. And then flooding happened, and then they also transformed their system internally, so that never really took flight. But we didn't really hit on some of the other, I guess, when we were talking, some of the other ideas or tactics that have kind of come and gone over the years in terms of ways we can be leveraging CTE more broadly and more innovatively for workforce.
And I think, then our thoughts were, that creates 17 more campuses for our state college system, right?
Well, it was more like a shared staffing model, right? Where like they're sharing that instructor to go in and deliver some portion of that coursework on the campus.
And that brings about accreditation.
Yes.
Jay was talking about. Then the ability to access BZAC and all the other funding mechanisms that can help support the system and help students as well.
Before we go, there's one other strategy that I wanted to bring up, and I'd just be personally remiss because it's one of my favorite areas if I didn't mention, which is if you recall back from a presentation, yes, that Secretary Saunders and Johannes Hensch did, oh gosh, back in January, at least 4 weeks ago now, about where we are in terms of after school and summer expansion, some of the identified priorities for the remaining funding for FY25 and going into FY26 are trying to incentivize programming that's going to push in college and career readiness strategies, as well as STEM and STEAM. So again, the agency's been really mindful about bringing all assets that we have into this effort. And so again, we're trying to coordinate at that level as well, not just what is happening during the school day, but how, from again, a workforce perspective, are we utilizing after school and summer, at least state funded opportunities for college and career readiness preparation and STEM and STEAM exposure.
Sounds like the silos are starting to fall.
Yes.
We have a new grant program, so it's regionalized, so we can have some of our statewide partners that are able to provide, for example, robotics across the state or arts programming, whatever it might be used to push in those resources to existing after school and summer programs. So we're excited about that opportunity to scale. There's effective partnerships with some industry aligned programs, but it's not what we would like to see consistently across the state. So this is an opportunity to extend that.
Good. So it's interesting, Jay's sort of categorizing things around training and education, but I've also heard there's a lot of overlap sometimes, and I'm wondering where we've heard about a lot of different programs. One of the ones is Emerging Pathways for teacher licensure. Where do you see that kind of not that particular program? Where do you see that falling
Is that?
Partnerships, yeah.
That's the,
in terms of, who would govern what, that kind of thing?
this is the Venn diagram of these two areas, right? So you have, I have a degree, right? But I work in a school and I don't have a path to licensure. That's what the short-term apprenticeship training is really about, helping someone gain the really explicit skills in classroom management and curriculum development that will get them to licensure. It can be also applied more broadly to be a longer term training that could take someone who doesn't have a degree and get them to a degree. And the apprenticeship model would be the method of training for that person.
That would be on the training side of things as opposed to education, or a little mixture?
I'm getting
It's a mix.
I'm getting a little outside my lane about education theory and where it's going, but I see that part of the Venn diagram getting bigger, not smaller in future years as those serve and learn, or learn and earn, serve, earn, learn, all of it become a more popular method for reaching your goals. In terms of Jay, going back to something you said at the beginning, a different mindset of young adults in terms of how they want to both be earning and learning at the same time. So again, that is just on behalf of myself, and I might be completely wrong if Secretary Saunders can talk about education theory, but I see that kind of piece of the Venn diagram getting bigger, not smaller, in terms of more embracing from different structures of those types of models for work-based learning, hands-on learning and earning type experiences. But
My little pieces, I'm hoping we're also thinking as we're talking about adult education with our justice involved population, because I think that as we're looking at more opportunities, more locations, more integration, that's another campus.
More workers.
More workers, more lower recidivism, right? Like all kinds of things like that. I just want to put out that front lens.
they have, maybe you guys have already explored this, but our understanding was we were going to be contracting more with CCV to have a more wide array of training opportunities in our correctional facilities, which will then better help people when they do it. So.
Really interesting, productive morning, I think. And I think we talk about CTE. I think one component that's been missing for all of these years is education and AOE and the need for us to partner all together. And I think we'll make it happen. At least I feel a lot better than I used to feel. This can really, it really can happen.
Surprisingly uplifting morning.
Yeah, we just keep students first, we can get there. So let us know how we can help.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you.
Deputy Commissioner, thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Roseman, and thanks to our, Justin and Jim as well. We'll, stay in contact. Put together. We come back to focus of where we go from here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, we're back at 1 to start about VEDA. Continue that discussion. Floor, then we come back for to finish our letter up to appropriations. So I think, any questions?